Hello, hi, this is Christian from NEPCON speaking. We are ready to start now. We have still 1 minute, so I will just wait until it's 2 o'clock here in Central European time. Everybody will be muted during the presentation, but you have the option to ask questions in the window, so you can type questions in the small window below the different buttons on the GoToMeetings control panel. So you can just type questions there, and then I will have a look. All right, I think we are ready to start. As I said, any questions we will try to deal with at the end of the presentation, which should take about half an hour. And as you are muted on your microphones, I will not be able to hear you, but you can type the questions in the small questions box in the control panel. So I will go ahead. We will also post this a recording of this webinar on our website, so you have the ability to share it with colleagues or other interested parties that want to hear this. So the topic of this webinar is to look a little bit deeper into the new control wood standard from FSC, the version 3 of the standard, looking at the requirements and some examples of how to manage and control risks in supply chains under the control standard. Very briefly about NEPCON, we are a non-profit organization that works to ensure responsible use of natural resources and secure sustainable livelihoods. And we do that by trying to transform land use, business practices, and consumer behavior. Part of this work is related to our FSC certification services, but also through other activities we have, like our project work and other assurance services related to sustainable natural resource management. We have more than 20 years of experience with verification and certification work within legal and sustainable forest management practices. We are also we were the first organization to become accredited against the new control wood standard from FSC. So we now hold the accreditation, and we are started auditing against the new standard. Also of relevance is that we are recognized EU timber regulation monitoring organization, been so since August 2013, and we work as a monitoring organization for European timber industry and also in their global supply chains. Just a brief look at the presentation here today. I will be looking at some of the key issues when we are talking about the control wood due diligence systems, how we work with risk assessments, and how from the risk assessment results we end up with risk mitigation measures and control measures to control the risks that has been specified. We're also going to look at the specific FSC requirements which are in the standard, so I will be looking at some of the direct requirements in the standard, and then I will be looking at some more practical examples of how risk mitigation can be implemented in a theoretical example. When we look at the whole process of a risk assessment and control process, it's kind of an iterative process, meaning that the whole process of due diligence, applying a risk-based approach to supply chain, includes looking at, of course, the source areas of material, and then to identify the risk related to those source areas. Also, the type of source area can have an implication on the risk. So once the source area has been identified, the risk have been specified, and the sources have been classified maybe into different risk types, for example, plantation areas or natural forest areas, which may have different types of risks. The next step is to implement or develop and implement a risk mitigation plan or strategy. Once that has been done, the specific control measures that's included in that risk mitigation strategy is being implemented, and going forward, the efficiency of those control measures should be monitored to ensure that they are actually efficient in addressing the risks that has been identified. Broadly speaking, when we talk about risk assessment and specifically also in the control board standard, they talk about risks at two different levels, and that includes risks at the source area, that means risk at forest level, or risks in the supply chain related to the mixing of controlled material with uncontrolled material. For looking at risks at the source area, FSC is conducting a number of risk assessments, and NEPCON is also working or collaborating with FSC in this process by developing centralized national risk assessments. FSC has posted an overview of the status of the different risk assessments globally, as you can see on this map here on the right, in this link, where you can see which risk assessments are ready and published and approved for each source area or each source country. So this is a really important source. You look at your source area, you have to look at what is the risk assessment available and what type of risk assessment is it. FSC has a, you can call it a hierarchy of risk assessments because the process of developing the new risk assessments according to the most recent FSC procedures is still ongoing. There are still a number of risk assessments that has been developed according to the old version of the FSC procedures. So if we take them from the top, the most recent and the excuse me, the most recent risk assessments are, and those that should be used if available, are the national risk assessments that are developed according to the FSC's procedure 60002 version 3. So they has to be used if they exist. If they do not exist, there may be a centralized national risk assessment, which is basically developed by organizations like NEPCON, but have not gone through the national initiative process, but it's the same scope of the risk assessment. So if they are available, they shall be used. If not, and then the current or the old version of the national risk assessment should be used where they are available. However, that is also in a transition period, so they shall not be used after 31st of December 2017. There is also options for the organization still to conduct their own risk assessment, either by a method called a simplified risk assessment, which may be used until, again, 31st December 2017, or to conduct a full or so-called extended risk assessment, which is basically the same process as in the new FSC procedure 6002 version 3. So this is the hierarchy of risk assessments. So that's what you have to look for when you conduct your risk assessments, is what type of risk assessment is available, or if none is available, then a risk assessment has to be conducted. Then there are specific requirements in the standard also for looking at risk of mixing. So any certified organization has to assess and document the risk of mixing material with non-electable inputs in the supply chain. However, there's little prescriptive requirements in that, so it's up to the organization to define methodology and indicators. course, risk of mixing is something where you look at, supply chain complexity, transparency, that access and quality to information or documentation about the material supply chain. But also something that can happen within, for example, processing facilities, where you can look at, is it a complex product where several types of inputs are used for production, or if there are tracking and traceability systems put in place by the processing organization. So this step of looking at risk of mixing is something that everybody has to do, and is not directly related to the risk assessment conducted at national level. So whenever a risk is specified, so in the new version of the standard, risks are specified. However, in the old version, the terminology of unspecified risk was used. So if you have a risk assessment either with specified or unspecified risk related to origin or to mixing, the organization shall implement the requirements of Section 4 of the standard before the material can be used as controlled and sold as FSC control wood. So if we look a little bit deeper in the standard requirements, we can look at what the control measures are, and they can either be established by the organization, or if available, they are provided in the relevant national risk assessment or centralized national risk assessment. And if they are in the national risk assessment, they will be obligatory, so you will have to use those except under certain circumstances. I'll get back to that. So if control measures are established by the organizations, they have to meet the risks that are identified, and these are requirements that are outlined in the numbers here that are mentioned in the standard. There are some requirements that if legal requirements conflict with adequate control measures, it's the certification that has to evaluate and approve if they are being used. Also, approved control wood documents shall be used when establishing control measures, including the FSC procedure 60002B, which contains a list of approved control wood documents. Oh, sorry. Here it should also be said that the national standard, that means the national forest level standards or certification body standards or other the international generic indicators from FSC can also be used as part of the control measures if they're relevant. So there are different options for looking at different types of control measures when these are established by the organization. When we are looking at category 2 and 3, which are high conservation value forest and areas where there are conflicts with local populations, stakeholder consultation is mandatory. That means even if there are no requirements as a control measure, there shall always be stakeholder consultation if there are specified risk in either category 2 or category 3. Also, the organization in this case has to use the opinion of at least one expert to justify the control measures unless they have already been provided as mandatory in the relevant national risk assessment. So when using these risk mitigation measures developed by the organization has to use the input of an expert. And there are some minimum requirements in the Annex C to the standard. So that means that if you're sourcing from areas with specified risk in category 2 or 3, then you have to use also the input of an expert that meets these requirements. So if the organization can, of course, use the control measure that are established by the national risk assessment, but they can also choose to replace those. But in that case, they have to be justified, and the CB has to evaluate them and approve them. So these are in cases where organizations use the control measures that are provided in the national risk assessment. Then they have to use them unless there's some really good justification that can be approved by the certification body. Here are some of the different control measures that are being mentioned by the FSC standard. So stakeholder consultation can be used in certain cases and always where there is specified risk in category 2 and 3. There can be use of experts to evaluate the risks or mitigate risks. Third-party certification and verification standards can be used. Of course, sourcing certified material is the way to mitigate risk. Field assessment on the ground may also be used where relevant. Depending on the type of risk that has been identified, this can be an efficient way to evaluate compliance with the controllable categories. Also, collection of additional information may be relevant in case that the risks identified relate to insufficient information or the risk of fraudulent information, for example. Also, segregation in the supply chain may be applied where there are risk of mixing. Then one option is to segregate controlled material from uncontrolled material. Naturally, also suppliers, forest level suppliers, could gain certification against the FSC control wood standard for forest managers, which has this code, standard 30010. That would, of course, relieve the need for the organization to conduct forest level verification and mitigation measures at the forest level. Then there is the other one is to source from a different supplier if possible that has low risk. Annex E in the standard has guidance on the development and some examples of control measures for the different categories of the standard. Annex B of the standard contains some minimum requirements for stakeholder consultation. There are some very specific requirements when that is used as a control measure. One of the most an important one is that the stakeholders need to be invited to provide feedback 6 weeks prior to the forest management or the management activities that's subject to consultation. So let's say that there are specified risk for harvesting within protected areas, then the stakeholder notification should go out to affected stakeholders 6 weeks prior to any management activities that's related to the harvesting, in order for them to allow them to provide feedback and comments. Also, the organization has 60 days after the end of the consultation period to respond to all participating stakeholders. Also, a summary needs to be prepared to outline the different steps of the consultation process, including who has been consulted, what they have been consulted on, and what the feedback was, and what the follow-up was from the organization. As mentioned before, there are requirements for experts being used by organizations. There is the opportunity or the requirement to use experts for certain types of mitigation activities. For example, if a company uses a specific expert for the development of a risk assessment, if there is no national risk assessment or centralized national risk assessment available, there are some very specific requirements to the experts that are allowed to do that. So the company cannot just make their own risk assessment without input from a qualified expert. Also, there are requirements for experts when they are being used to implement or monitor the control measures being implemented. As I mentioned before, there are some examples in Annex E, which is informative with some guidance and examples of control measures which can guide companies to implement them. Sorry. The last part here of the standard relates to a new initiative by FSC, which is the fiber testing program, based on the assessment of needs for especially companies that are sourcing into the European market under the EU timber regulation. FSC has initiated a fiber testing program, so they are inviting FSC certified organizations to participate in this. And you can do that by filling in a form that is sent to FSC along with samples of material. So I would recommend, if you're interested in this, to have a look at the standard and see what it entails. Okay, when we start looking at a little bit more in practical examples of how risk mitigation or control of risks happen in supply chains, because it is quite complicated to really get a grasp of what is enough when you talk about different types of risks. So it's really a quiet task to learn how to mitigate risk and to understand when they're being adequately mitigated. One thing that we often underline is the collaboration of suppliers. Obviously, especially if you have a relatively complex supply chain, it would be very difficult to obtain the necessary access to forest level or to supply chain entities. Therefore, the collaboration of suppliers is a key activity when talking about risk mitigation. So really, without the active participation and support of suppliers, it would be very difficult. And the reasons are, of course, that suppliers are closer to the sourcing area where the risk may be identified. They have a certain level of local knowledge. They understand what the issues are. They may have direct relationships with their suppliers, of course, but also with sub-suppliers if it's a complex supply chain. There can also be language issues if you source from different countries than your own. It's very important when developing a risk mitigation strategy that the control measures are appropriate to the specified risk. So the more detailed the risks can be specified, the easier it is to actually identify efficient risk mitigation measures. So it's very important, again, to separate between what are the risks really. Are they related to the origin level, or are they related to the supply chain or risk of mixing? Of course, the risk mitigation measures will be very different related to or depending on where they are located in the supply chain. And of course, also there are several factors that influence the risk mitigation strategy, not only from a technical perspective, but also from a company perspective in terms of the profitability. So you have to look at the nature of the risk. Where is it located? What type is it? And is it possible to mitigate it at all? What's the likely efficiency? What will it cost to implement them? Is there capacity and human resources available, or can they be hired from external experts? Are there other options? As I talked about before, there may be options for sourcing certified material. Also, the relation to suppliers, control of suppliers is important. So all these issues, of course, is part of the more business-related decision in the company. So when you are confronted with sourcing material from areas with specified or unspecified risk, very early on in the process you can actually make decisions here. Well, let's say you have identified that there are risks in the area, source area. So you can choose completely to avoid risk by replacing suppliers with something that's easily identified at low risk, or different species, for example, or different source types. You can also, of course, choose to source certified material or help your suppliers to become certified. So in that way, you can say that you are avoiding risk altogether. But often this will not be possible, and in this case, risk mitigation will have to be conducted in order to control the risks that are identified. And of course, again, then there are different, as I just went through, different ways that you can work with risks. You can collect additional information if the risk is related to insufficient documentation or fraudulent documentation. You can work with suppliers to implement control measures from the forest through the processing, and also you can implement forest level or factory level auditing and verification of the compliance with the control wood categories to ensure conformance to all the requirements. We're going to look a little bit at the different options here. Of course, changing suppliers or species or the type of material may be an option, but it also may not be possible if there is a specific requirements that can only be fulfilled by uncertified material that is not that cannot be substituted. Certified material obviously is a control measure here. The standard you can use obviously 100% certified. You can use FSC mix, FSC recycled. You can also use FSC control wood, as I just mentioned. Also, the new standard has the allowance for certified material from FSC certified forest to be allowed as control wood, even in cases where the chain of custody has been broken. So you can buy from a non-certified supplier if they can document that they can purchase and sell material from a certified forest. But of course that has to be justified and documented and approved by the certification body. Then there's a question of all the other types of certification systems and legality verification programs that is in existence. The question is, do they have any value in regards to the control wood program? The easy question is no, because FSC has not formally recognized any of these programs as part of the control wood system, but depending on the type of risk that is specified, it may be possible to justify that they do in fact have value. Let's say, for example, that you are sourcing from an area with specified risk for certain legal issues, then it may be possible to source material that is certified or verified against a legality verification standard and use that as the specific risk mitigation measure for those specific issues related to legality. But as such, other certification systems are not recognized by the FSC control wood program. Collecting additional information, that's of course something that can have relevance if if you have insufficient information and documentation from your supply chain, that would be often a risk that is identified early on in your due diligence process. When you start requiring information about material, then it's relevant to obtain information, but also to analyze the documents and information you receive from your suppliers to verify that that documentation is actually valid, that it's related to your product, that it's relevant and contain relevant information related to the risk specified. So that's often something that's a process that goes on in the beginning, but actually throughout the due diligence work, the collection of documents and evidence from the supply chain, from the forest through processing and transport is a very important process, but it's also very important that the evaluation and use of documents in a due diligence system is done with great care, and that documents are not always accepted on their face value, because we all know that paper is easy to change, and it's very easy to encounter fraudulent practices and related to documents and permits and so on, especially countries with high levels of corruption. Oh, sorry. I mentioned also timber testing. NEPCON is working with different options for providing timber testing services, and as I mentioned, FSC is also conducting a timber testing program, and there are of course different methods that can be applied in, and they have different values. The typical methodologies are looking at the wood anatomy, and that can be done at both macroscopic and microscopic levels to look at the fibers or the structure of the timber. There are also certain use of DNA technology in identifying species, and the last one here is the stable isotope analysis, which can be used quite efficiently to identify the origin of material. So all these methods have different applications and can be used as depending on what the type of risk and depending on what it is you would like to know. For example, wood anatomy is efficient in identifying the species, whereas stable isotope cannot be used for species identification, but is much more efficient in evaluating the origin of the material. So when we talk about timber testing, it can be relevant to ask when to test the products. Of course, when new product lines are introduced, that can be relevant, or if there are general concerns about the authenticity of timber in a product, or if you have products that are component products with a large number of species, if you change a manufacturer or supplier, where you want to test the validity of the information you receive, or of course if previous testing has identified challenges with the species or origin, it can be an idea to conduct ongoing species testing on a sample basis just to verify the correctness of the supply chain information you receive. The last issue here is supplier verification, and on the webinar we have on Thursday, I will talk in more detail about how we see supplier verification and supplier auditing programs to work as a necessary component of risk mitigation when you source from specified risk areas. But of course, going to the forest, visiting the forest and verifying the issues that have been specified risk can be, or is often the only way that certain issues or risks can be actually verified and controlled. And also visiting or auditing suppliers at forest level or at processing level can be used or should be used as monitoring the effectiveness of risk mitigation actions. Lastly, here I'm going to give an example from the Lithuania National Risk Assessment. So in this case, the company is sourcing from Lithuania. What they will see in the National Risk Assessment that's available from FSC is that health and safety has been identified as specified risk within the category 1 of the control board system, that's legality. So the risk is specified connected to the actual logging operator or operation, but not to the forest management in general. So it means that logging companies conducting the harvesting in Lithuanian forest, that's where the risk of health and safety violations or violations of health and safety regulation has been identified. So straight from knowing that that is the risk, one could conclude that it will be low risk if you are, of course, purchasing certified material, as we looked at before, or that the logging company has been third-party certified against a health and safety standard or a forest contractor certification, or if the logging company is already working within a FSC certified forest, or if the logging operation or company is implementing documented health and safety procedures. So in all those cases, the sourcing would be low risk. However, sourcing from smaller logging companies working in private forests would be specified risk. In this case, you could follow the following process to implement control measures. The first question here would be that to ask if the products can be traced back to the actual logging company responsible for conducting the harvest operation. If no, then of course there is a lack of information and the material should not be sourced. And then additional information should be obtained as part of a risk mitigation strategy. If yes, the next issue here or question here is to ask if the logging company have recognized third-party certification covering health and safety. As I mentioned before, if they have, then the risk should be mitigated. If no, you should ask if the logging company have a valid contract with FSC certified operation for providing logging services. That means that the harvest company is harvesting within an FSC certified forest. If yes, that's also mitigating the risk. If no, you continue to number 4 and ask if the logging company have health and safety procedures in place. If yes, you should go to 5 and ask if audits of ongoing operations confirm that staff has all legally required personal protection equipment. And if the outcome of those audits are yes, then it should be low risk. So this is a case where you would actually carry out a certain level of on-site forest level auditing of health and safety requirements during harvesting. If no here, then you should ask if the logging company agreed to observe legally required health and safety requirements and audits by representative of the organization. Obviously, if they do not agree to that, you will not be able to verify that the regulations are being observed, and then you cannot mitigate the risk. Therefore, you should not source the material. If yes, we can go on to number 7 here and ask if the field audit verify compliance with health and safety requirements, and if they do, then yes, then it's low risk. And if no, obviously, then there is further control measures or activities that has to be implemented by the logging organization. If we go back here to say that if the company have no safety procedures, we go to 8, which is this one here, and then logging company agree to establish procedures that ensure that all health and safety requirements in connection with forest harvesting is observed. If they say yes, they should be audited and their compliance should be verified. And we are back at, of course, if they conform to health and safety requirements, the risk is considered to be mitigated, and if no, it's not. And then it cannot be sourced, or further risk mitigation activities has to be conducted. That was kind of the last slide I have on the example here. So that's going through a simple example of how the process of risk mitigation and control measures can be implemented in an example from an actual forest, including different types of risk mitigation options as mentioned. The last point here is that we have another webinar on Thursday, also 2 o'clock, where we will be looking more closely on controlling risk in supply chains and working with suppliers to control risks. So that is on Thursday the 8th, 2 o'clock Central European Time. So if you have not joined, please go to our website and you can sign up. That was all from me, and I would like to invite questions now. So if there are any questions to the standard or to the presentation or more specific issues related to the control book standard or to implementing control measures, please feel free to ask.
There is one question. Do you see? Christian?
Yes, I see that. Well, if one category has been gone through the full FSC process against version 3 and FSC has publicized this as finalized, then it can be used as part of the risk assessment. So in that case, that would be a combination actually of using different risk assessment. But you have to look at the FSC website that I link to in the presentation, and we will share the presentation as well to have a look at what they are posting. Then there's a question here asking, is it always the CB that audits, for example, logging companies, or are the audits sometimes performed by the certified organization? Well, that it's both. The system as it's set up, so let's say you have specified risk at a logging operation or at forest level. It is the responsibility of the certified organization to implement the control measures. That means that, let's say the risks are that harvesting is being conducted within the buffer zones around rivers and waterways. Then it would actually be expected that the certified organization implement control measures, for example, on-site audits of harvesting operations to verify that timber is not being harvested within the buffer zones of rivers and waterways. What the CB would have to do is to conduct sample audits of the control measures implemented by the certified organization. So it is actually in the new version of the standard required that the certified organization themselves implement on-site verification of any specified risk where they are mandated by the national risk assessments. And the CBs will then also have to evaluate those also on site in the forest. Just let me know if I don't answer or if you don't understand my answers, then please ask again. Okay, I don't see that there are any more questions. So I hope it's very clear. Of course, you are welcome to contact me on my email here and ask if there are clarifying questions after the seminar. But if there are no other questions now, then I will say thank you for participating and invite you also to participate or listen in on Thursday, where I will talk a bit more on some practical examples of control measures, working with suppliers, and underlining the there is a question, FSC quo vadis. I don't understand that. I guess it's Latin. What does that mean? All right. I will end the webinar now. But again, thank you very much for participating. And please don't hesitate to ask if you have questions.